Okay, so this is the second part of a small series on independent and mainstream cinema with a small discussion on political cinema as well. So hopefully you've already watched the mainstream video because it's easy to compare what mainstream cinema does with independent cinema because they are pretty much opposite in almost every way. So for example, we talked about mainstream cinema being dominated by 6 large multinational conglomerates. Independent cinema will represent much smaller production firms with significantly smaller and lower budgets. They are often unproven directors. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're always poor or bad quality directors. There may well be instances of poor quality directors in independent cinema, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are independent cinemas because they are not good enough to be mainstream directors. It may well just be that they haven't quite made it yet because of a number of reasons we talked about as risks. With mainstream cinema, commercial companies will not want to take a risk on a new up-and-coming director when they could just get a proven director to successfully create the new comic book, action, whatever genre hybrid it may well be, in order to make quick money and move on. So, for example, there may well be less pressure or involvement or even meddling by commercial executives at a small production company level. A director may have a lot more creative control over the film that they want to make. For example, if you look at meddling by commercial executives in Hollywood, perhaps look at J.J. Abrams and the involvement of Disney in The Rise of Skywalker, which led to a very messy, perhaps critically unsuccessful film in the fandom in particular, despite still making billions of dollars. And perhaps to a degree also the Schneider Cut in Justice League, where we had, again, a messy film where a number of different directors were involved. There were commercial influences from above, and as a result of that, again, you get a product that is perhaps not necessarily the creative direction of the original director. Therefore, you get an opportunity for a movement to suggest, well, actually, can we see that director's original cut? That doesn't necessarily happen with independent cinema at the bottom end of this chain, I guess, because smaller production companies don't have that creative involvement from above. They don't have anyone meddling. They don't have anyone saying, make sure you don't do that, make sure you do this, make sure there's opportunities for merchandising there. They have a lot more creative control over their own products because they haven't yet made it to the level where a commercial company may well be pressuring them to make changes. That could be seen as a good thing for the director to make the film they truly want to make, but also it comes with its disadvantages because without a large conglomerate support, you probably have significantly less money to make your project. Having said that, a small independent director without a large conglomerate making decisions on their behalf, they may well be able to take more risks, perhaps to get noticed in the first place. So as a result of that, you do find small independent directors are able to make more unique, innovative narratives and explore some concepts that perhaps mainstream cinema may shy away from. They also have a lot more creative control to make the film how they want, both technically and in terms of their creative vision. For example, I often use Monsters as a case study from Gareth Edwards. As it happens, you may well have heard of Gareth Edwards. He is a relatively famous director at the moment, having filmed Rogue One, for example, recently, Star Wars film. But at the time, this was his first film. Gareth Edwards made Monsters almost entirely on his own. He worked as the cinematographer, the production designer, the visual effects artist, and the editor for the film himself, entirely on his own. He worked with a very small crew because he couldn't afford to pay a larger one, and he filmed on location across a couple of different countries that just so happened to already look like the narrative and the set that he desired, because he didn't have the money to make large, expensive sets. He often used extras, for example, as the people who just happen to be in the background, perhaps paying members of the public small fees to just perhaps be an extra, rather than have a large company hire several thousand teams of extras from an actual company that provides extras. The film was made for a budget of $500,000. It made £4.2 million at the box office, and this was in 2010, so it's perhaps made a lot more than that since it's been released on DVD, etc. And as a result, he had what's referred to as auteur status, where he had creative control and the freedom to create the film that he wanted to make. Okay, there wasn't any external pressure from executives or corporations, and he made the film he wanted to make. It was a successful film. It made $4.2 million off a budget of $500,000. That's a big markup in terms of how much it made compared to how much it cost to make. Okay, so that's quite a good film to use as a case study for independent cinema. Okay, just another few bits and pieces to focus on in terms of that. We have consumer grade cameras being used. They look particularly fancy in that particular clip picture there, but they were still consumer grade DSLRs. What that means is theoretically you could perhaps purchase them for a relatively small amount of money. We might still be talking £2,000 to £3,000 for a DSLR of that nature, with all the scaffolding, logs, rigs, etc. But it's still relatively cheap compared to perhaps 7 or 8 large Hollywood quality cameras. Okay, and he did operate and edit using Premiere Pro, which is industry standard, but still software you can download off the internet for a reasonable fee, perhaps a subscription to Adobe per year, on a MacBook, which again, unto itself, one single MacBook, £800, is perhaps a lot of money to a small independent production company with a budget, but once you've bought it, perhaps you might use that MacBook several times. It may well be a small investment. Again, you can perhaps afford that from your budget, and it's nowhere near the amount of money you would have to pay for a large building with several rooms full of the most top-of-the-range computers with large servers and a whole team of editors. Relatively speaking, it is more affordable. Okay, just a small commentary on independent cinemas themselves. Often look a little bit more old-fashioned, perhaps something like the Gala up in Durham, perhaps more referred to as theatres, perhaps than your multi-screen multiplexes that we talked about in the mainstream example. Okay, so compared to mainstream, much smaller budgets, much more creative control. Okay, thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I will see you in the next video.